Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with Season 6, Episode 41 of our weekly P&Q&C&A&T videos, which is like a Q&A video, except it also has a P, which stands for Podcast and Patreon and Patrons, which is to say that you can also listen to this. You can listen and watch if you want on YouTube, or if you are on the YouTube video, you can check out the links in the description to watch this on most major podcasting platforms. The Q stands for questions, like the Q&A part of Q&A. C is for comments, just because, sometimes we use comments as a jumping off point that aren't actually asking anything specific. A is answers, as you know, and then T is for talking, because whether or not we're responding to a question, sometimes we don't always answer.
This is true.
And so that's just sort of the most technical way to encompass anything we could possibly do in the course of one of these videos.
Yes.
And we thought it was funny, and it's a lot of letters, and we have to explain it every time now. So getting into the Q, the first one comes from Necrophades. I don't know how this is pronounced. It seems like Necro and Hades is part of it, but...
I was reading it more like shades, like Necrophades.
Maybe,
but,
I don't know.
Either
way, their question is, have you ever played DC Universe Online, since you say you relate to DC characters?
Short answer is nope. And the longer answer is, definitely I have loyalty to DC. I maybe said this before, but when I was growing up at the library, the only comics they would have would be two DC comics. It was Warlord and Amethyst.
Yeah.
And I used to desperately look through the entire library for issues to try to make a whole story out of it. Mm-hmm. But even without that, I would reread those issues over and over that they happen to have. But so it's not just DC loyalty. It's I think there was a perfect storm, because normally I don't play a lot of video games. The most I used to play on the computer was I used to play Boggle Online. And I used to get pretty good at that. Yeah,
you played some Pokemon games. You played some fighters, but not a ton.
And it was because we were on vacation that we happened to both be playing Justice at the same time. Perfect storm.
Yeah, I think you mentioned this recently.
We did. It feels like it. And so it's not that I'm definitely loyal to DC. I like Marvel stuff too. But I definitely feel a strong affinity for DC characters. And if there was something I was going to try, it probably would be DC. But it would take a lot more than just that to get us started on a new game. And I think...
Yeah, not a lot of time for games right now. The only thing that I've been playing recently is pretty much The Binding of Isaac, which is just a game that I play when I listen to podcasts or music, when I want to do something with my hands. It's not really like a sort of game. Or it is, but it's something that you can just sort of do idly.
Yeah, I think that's the key, right? That if there were another game that we were to pick up, I think we'd have to be playing it a little bit more mindfully, and it would take our attention. It's incredible to me that you can actually multitask that way and consume that much content, and I just can't. There's books. A friend sent me a manuscript of a book that they're trying to get published, and I'm starting to read that. And there's at least two other books that are sort of right top of mind, like Because Internet, that language book that I really want to read. I also want to read Steers.
The Steers Woman series.
Steers Woman series, because I just picked that up. We met the writer at the Scintillation convention. Yeah. And it sounds really interesting. And I just don't have time to do stuff. And that ignores all the other stuff that I do for work. Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit crazy, but we are definitely if there was something, if there was a chance that anything was going to tempt us, it'd probably be DC, for us to at least play it at a level where we really get into the bones of it.
I would say for me, I don't know if I have that sort of loyalty to any property. One sort of game series that I really liked to the point where sort of the characters in the iconography would have probably been enough was Fallout. When Fallout 4 was coming out from Fallout 3. Right. And I think that was just a time in my life, because I enjoyed the Fallout games, but it never really sort of grabbed me. I think most stuff hasn't really grabbed me the way Injustice has. I think the only stuff that has grabbed me in a lasting way are actually like little short indie, like 1 and 2 hour experience type of games, like Her Story.
But the way our channels worked, I think it's got to be something that has to grab both of us.
Yeah.
Right? Because there have been times where your interest is flagged, there's been time where my interest is flagged, and as long as one of us is still on it, then it's been enough for us to carry on at least a bit of a conversation that can carry over into videos, where we're just thinking and talking about the game a bit.
Yeah, so I guess it's a very long answer to, have you ever played DC Universe Online?
That's
and
no.
The short answer is no. I think we did say that at the top, but There we go. Next comment comes from Bruce Laredo, and he says, "It's really fun to watch you guys demonstrate teams like this. Hopefully you have a few more up your sleeves as I find them really entertaining. Now I just need the totem to be in multiplayer award so I can start using your recommendations. Haha."
All right, so this is interesting, and thank you for the compliment that it's fun to watch us.
Yeah.
And so this was about the Red Lantern Hal Jordan team, I think. That was the most recent one. So here's the thing. What's interesting, when you look back at the history of the game, right now, the single most important gear, I think, is Tantu Totem.
Yeah.
Because it's completely, in a way, overwritten every single meta strategy in the game.
Yeah, I think the top two, Tantu Totem and Master of Death Guard, are probably the most important. And then after that, I would say Astro Harness is probably the next sort of most important to the current meta.
Having Astro Harness or having a strategy against it? I mean, I guess, in my mind, I'm thinking along lines of, so you want to be able to beat the teams. The biggest part of that you're going to have control over is being offensive. And I'll make the argument that we've actually seen a kind of transition where each time there's a new piece of gear, more so than a new character. Every time there's a new piece of gear that rewrites the strategy book. So remember when gear first came out?
Yeah.
And healing stacked.
Oh yeah, and healing was brutal.
Right. And if you were going to have defensive wins, if you're going to beat the other team, if you're going to have a chance at being able to outlast the other team, you would need to have good healing gears.
Yeah. I remember somebody sending a screenshot of a fight that lasted like 27 minutes or something like that.
I remember having a recording of a fight that lasted more than 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And it was a Man of Steel team that we had that was healing on Special 1 and Special 2, and we just could not make headway for the first 10 minutes into knocking the other guy out. So that was the first. And then the next thing became basic damage. Once healing stopped stacking, basic damage monsters were it. That was where your strategy was.
Yeah.
And that totally wiped out any kind of, like, the tanks were important, but you could not get away with having a couple tanks. At most, you would have one tank that would eat some damage.
Yeah.
And then Astro Harness came out, and it became not so much that the strategy was to have a tank, but that you needed a strategy to be able to kill time while the other team's tank with Astro Harness was working through its invulnerabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And now with Tantu Totem, despite all probably because of all the special dodgers, Tantu Totem became the single most important gear. It wiped out every other strategy. It was no longer important to have characters that were tanks. It was no longer that important to have characters that were basic damage dealers, despite...
Well, the fan is going wild on this laptop. Hope that doesn't come up in the audio.
Yeah, that is crazy. It probably will. We might have to do some sort of post-production stuff that I have no idea how to do to fix it. So the idea of all the not only the special dodgers, but the special dodgers that would actually punish you...
Yeah.
Is crazy.
Where they like come back and deal damage back for the first
so
time.
Like say Dawn of Justice Batman, they would come back and hit you, right? And potentially stun you if you don't block.
Yeah.
Or Wally West, it would come and give you a big smack in the jaw. And it's made everything else obsolete. And I like it because it's fun doing specials, but I don't like it because what I would like to see is maybe more balance in the teams, so that there's other teams, not just like different characters, but teams that are built around different strategies, so that you're more likely to face somebody who's a basic damage dealer but is still pretty good.
Yeah, team strategies are pretty homogenous now.
Yeah.
And I think the more stuff they added, I think that makes sense, right? Because I think there was a point where they were a little more balanced, where you could pick between things better, right? And I think you still can to some extent. But definitely the optimal strategy has become a lot more homogenous, because it's the new stuff, basically. Put the new stuff on it, right?
Right. Yeah, it's but I feel like I'm ungrateful for complaining, because what Tantu Totem did was it made the characters that had passives that relied on doing specials viable
and fun.
Right. So New 52 Wonder Woman, who would share power with her teammates, wasn't that great, because it takes so long to build up power, even with power gen gears, that you would spend a bunch of time trying to generate power. You do a little bit of whatever, and then let's say her teammate, like on our team, is New 52 Superman. He's built up a little bit of power, but not nearly enough to actually take advantage of his passive, which requires a boost requires 2 bars each time to boost his attack.
Yeah.
So I think there's got to be some way. I think the next step, if you're going to really sort of rebalance things, is to come out with a gear that will let basic damage dealers do more, like a flashpoint kind of level damage. And they've sort of moved in that direction with their tanks with Batman's Ninjato.
Or you could literally have anything that did something to power. You could have blocking, like power gain from abilities.
Right.
Right? You could block any non-sort of natural combat-based power gain, and then all of a sudden, you know, you would still have maybe Tantric Totem and Master Death Card on your specialist, right? But then you need to have sort of a backup if you played against that.
And I just want to say, I was thinking Ninjato. I pictured Batman and Robin, and I remember the B. It's Brandish Ninjato, not Batman's Ninjato. So I wanted to correct myself. Yeah.
Okay. I think we can move on to our next comment.
Yes.
This one comes from James Liang, and this is sort of in response to our political discussion from last time about Canadian politics. It reads as follows: Justin Trudeau is an absolute buffoon and a hypocritical narcissist. However, the Canadian Conservatives have their own fair share of weaknesses.
Yeah, so this is interesting. To me, the federal Conservatives are kind of flawed to the point of being unelectable right now. And I mean, it played out in the election. I mean, technically they're not unelectable. I mean, to me, I can't vote for them. And I don't know what your position is.
Yeah, no, I am pretty staunchly anti-conservative in Canada as they stand right now. Obviously, I mean, we've talked about this before probably, but there's an issue almost inherent in sort of saying I am against like this party, right? Because parties shouldn't matter, and you can talk about what they've been up to this point, but I think, you know, there's obviously reasons for every party having support, and sometimes the reason is ignorance, but sometimes the reason is also that there's aspects of them that are good, right?
Yeah.
And there's a sort of issue inherent in even just party mentality at all, instead of just supporting sort of platforms and ideas and the things that you want, right? Yeah. But I think as it stands, conservatives sort of suck right now.
So maybe I want to come at a point from an injustice lens, okay? So to me, this is, and I've said this before, this is so
I'm
much...
I'm interested in how you're going to try to pull this off.
Okay. So our recent video, Red Lantern Hal Jordan, I talked about this. And for how good Red Lantern Hal Jordan was, and for how much time we put in, how many of our crit chance and crit damage boost cards that we put on him, our augmentations, he was amazing. And when they nerfed him, when they took his special 2 that used to do more damage than listed to doing less damage than listed, and when they took his power that would suck up his health, but they would make you wait for him to power up again after you used a couple bars of power, he probably wasn't that awful, but I hated playing with him because every time I played with him, I remembered how good he used to be. Mm-hmm. And to me, no matter how good he was, even compared to other characters, even if he was better than somebody else, I would almost rather play somebody else than to play him because of what he made me think of.
That's fair, yeah, because you're remembering when times were better.
And I think Justin Trudeau is very much like that. His flaw is not so much that he's a hypocrite, if he is, because there are a lot of politicians that are unable to maintain their integrity.
Yeah.
As politicians once they get elected, right? Mm-hmm. So, you know, he campaigned upon electoral reform and
And then he didn't do it.
I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of reasons. The problem is because of the inertia of first past the post system, people who win tend to have more of, they get to represent more of the people than actually voted for them.
Yeah, I think we literally talked about this last time too.
Did we? Okay.
I'm fairly confident.
All right, so then let's scrap that. So the problem though is that when you're disappointed in the one, it makes others look more attractive, even if those others are kind of crap.
Yeah.
And so maybe we'll start. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Ontario Conservatives a bit.
Okay.
Because even though the federal and the Ontario Conservatives are sort of different beasts, and they're associated really by name only, and I know that Andrew Scheer isn't Doug Ford, but the problem with Scheer and his association with Ontario is that He was happy to ride on Ford's coattails when Ford was just brand new elected, and he clearly had a mandate, right? But I'll hazard the opinion that it wasn't so much that Ford was the reason the Conservatives were elected. It's that everybody was tired of Kathleen Wynne, and whoever the Conservatives had, they were going to win no matter what. And it was Conservatives' mistake to let Ford be the representative of their party when anybody they picked up would have been good enough to win. Anyways, all right, so that was when he was elected. Now that Ford is unpopular, during the campaign, Scheer completely avoided mentioning Ford's name. He brought in another province's premier to help him campaign in Ontario. And he was unwilling to say that he wouldn't do the same things that Ford had done. I mean, basically the idea that he'd promise a bunch of cuts, go back on some of them when he gets pushback on it, and basically leave everything in chaos. And the other problem was Scheer has this weird habit of not willing to listen. People make mistakes.
Yeah.
He wasn't willing to go back and say, "Oh, what I said that time that was really bad, I changed my mind."
Yeah, there's a lack of I don't get a sense of an accountability from him, for sure. And I disagree with a lot of his personally held beliefs and his sort of attempt to maybe assuage people's fears about that by saying he won't bring it into his politics. Right? Does not ring true to me, especially when he voted against gay marriage, right? When he when you can see that his stances on things that are important to me are very, very are diametrically opposed with how I think things should be.
Right.
You can't tell me that he's not going to bring that in. That he's not going to bring his own sort of personality and opinions and beliefs to the table. Even if he doesn't directly do anything, making things legally worse for LGBTQ folks, right? There's a bias there that is unavoidable. And when the system, even when it's not legally biased, is in many other ways biased against a lot of these marginalized folks anyways, the fact that you'd be putting somebody in power who also harbors the same beliefs that would keep things as bad or make them worse is a scary thought.
Yeah. And the fact that he's unwilling to do that, but he's sort of that, it's almost like he's trying to pander to both sides. He's unwilling to stand for something strongly enough to be willing in a way that might potentially alienate people who disagree with him. So he's backed off completely, so that he's really not taking a stand on anything at all.
And I think he did that because he was able to, because it wasn't like there was somebody more extreme who was actually,
Maxime Bernier?
Who had a chance to win. It's not like there was somebody more extreme who had a chance to win who was making promises that he needed to up, right? It's like The Price is Right, where you have to be the furthest without going over.
Or the closest without going over.
Yeah, where I think if you go too far...
Right, if you think everybody's gone over, you can bet $1 and you'll win.
Yeah, so what he was doing was he was looking... he was just betting higher than anybody else on the conservative spectrum who had any chance of winning. Right? So you don't need to make commitments the same way, right? If we had somebody who was, far-right, alt-right, who was nearing the mainstream, right? I mean... Then I think he would have had to maybe take some more stances, because there were voters on that side that you want to win, but he really wanted to win voters in the middle, right?
Yeah.
And
well, he didn't have a middle platform, is the problem.
But I mean, especially when people who were on the fence, right? And then maybe being sort of pushed away from Liberals by Justin Trudeau, right? Those are the people that were important for him to win.
Right.
And so I think in that case it makes more sense to not, come out and say all the crappy things that he's going to do, because I think I mentioned this last week too. I knew somebody who almost voted Conservative because they hadn't looked into him.
And because they had Justin Trudeau as basically Red Lantern Hal Jordan.
Yeah, they thought Justin Trudeau was bad. They looked into policy some, but they were looking into sort of what they were saying they were going to do. And at face value, I mean, if they sounded completely unreasonable at face value, that would be... they're smarter than that, right? Even if you think the things that they're ultimately doing are not good, right? They're politicians, and they are adults, and they are educated, and they're smart enough people that, they're going to frame their arguments in the good faith way that makes them sound good, because that is the things that they believe, right? So they had looked at the policy in that lens and almost voted Conservative.
Right.
Just because, he doesn't really commit hard enough, right? When no comment, in the context of what he's no commenting, it's pretty
Well, it's a
obvious that
statement.
it is
It
a
is
statement because it should be like no, you really should be willing to say that this is a mistake, right? This is something that you shouldn't have done or shouldn't have said, right? But
it's like sometimes when you put off making a decision, sometimes it's a decision in and of itself.
Yeah.
Like sometimes the fact that you're not making a stand is a bit of a stance.
Yeah, but you only get that if you see the original clip for yourself, or if you hear other people comment on it, right?
Right.
That's not part of their platform. It's not a statement that he's made, right? So it's not something that it happens. You probably don't learn about that by primary source the same way that you could learn about other policy.
Right, because the biggest part of the news cycle was Justin Trudeau, a bit of a racist when he was not so young.
Or at the very least, very racially insensitive.
Fair enough.
We can't speak to his prejudices. He contributed to, a negative climate.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. Because to me, I probably care about this a little bit more than I did when I was your age, but I'll say that too. The stuff we said about Scheer was enough to disqualify him. The problem is that if you're looking at it as a two-party kind of race, the worst parts of Trudeau, or the visibly worst parts of Trudeau, are there in Scheer.
Yeah.
So if you don't like the Trans-Canada Pipeline, if you feel like that goes against the plan to help save our environment, Scheer's going to push it harder than Trudeau ever would. Scheer is his base is in Alberta.
Yeah.
He's never going to not support the pipeline or the production of oil out of the tar sands.
Yeah.
And if you don't like someone who used to be racist, who happened to disavow his past, which Trudeau did, then you're really not going to like an anti-abortionist who can't bring himself to change his mind.
Well, I had multiple Indian friends who were like not voting for Trudeau for this reason is awful and dumb. And the people who they mentioned, right, they're saying it anecdotally too, obviously. But the people who are saying they're not willing to vote for Trudeau over this seem to be white folks mostly. Yeah. And they were both talking about you still have to vote for Trudeau, right? Like if you're voting for Scheer on somebody else's behalf, it's our behalf, and we don't want that, right? That's not useful.
And I think probably not an awful thing would have been to vote for another party that happened to not have those kind of conservative values. I was actually holding out hope for Jagmeet Singh for the NDP party. The problem was in our riding,
chance.
There's no chance. If anything, the Green Party was going to be doing better and maybe even an independent. So, it does come back to strategic voting a little bit, but man, electoral reform would have been so good.
It would. Electoral reform would be stellar. I know it's not a magical fix for everything, but it's a really positive step towards good democracy, better democracy.
So maybe what would be really good would be if the government that was going to potentially do it would have a personal stake in it, where if they were looking at a reduced government, this would have been the perfect opportunity for Liberals to do it, because they were bound to lose their majority anyways.
Yeah.
And even though they lost the popular vote, they still would have been participating in a minority government where they would have had some influence.
Yeah, and honestly, it's the issues with parties where the political system is set up to primarily, your primary goal is for you to be the person in power, so you get to make the right call, right? Because you think what you're doing is the right call. So the best part is to preserve power for yourself. That's the first step. And the second step is to, once you're there, represent your voters, right? So many people much smarter than us have talked at length about sort of the issues with the system as it's set up. But it's so frustrating to participate in it. Especially when there are people talking about it and saying, hey, I hear you, we should change this, and I'm going to be the person to do it, and then they don't. The fact that he's talking about it is a good sign. The fact that he's not doing anything about it is really, really frustrating, right? And it's exactly that kind of stuff that it's understandable why it pushes people away.
So the key to me then is, to me, this comes back to the original thing. I think I said this maybe a year or so ago. It's a failure of intent or a failure of execution.
Yeah.
Failure of execution means that somebody's saying the right things, they just don't get it done.
Yeah.
And the failure of intent is where they're trying to do not the right thing anyways.
Yeah.
And to me, the Conservatives are a failure of intent, and Trudeau and the Liberals right now are failure of execution. And I would much rather have failure of execution where we can at least talk about these things and agree that they are things of value, so that because if we don't discuss them and we somehow convince ourselves that they're not important, the same way that raising minimum wage apparently was not important until Kathleen Wynne did it for the province of Ontario, which I think was, to me, that'll be her legacy. All the other scandals and stuff, I think there was a potential for any political party to do that. Raising minimum wage as much as she did when she did in the face of that kind of opposition, I think it was transformative for Ontario's economy and for the people who work there. Because, and I'm going to say this again, I know I've said it a bunch of times. If your business, I love this. If your business plan requires you to pay people not a living wage, even if they're going to work a full-time work week, you've got a problem with your business plan. That business does not deserve to be viable. So, listen, the hypocrite, I guess, if you can show me a different party or leader that can stand for the same things without being a hypocrite, I would love that. The problem is the only way that, a party like the Conservatives or the Canadian, what's CPC? Maxime Bernier, what was his thing called?
People's Party of Canada. It's PPC. Yeah.
The People's Party of Canada. The only way they can be not hypocrites is if they promise really bad things and then they carry through with them.
Yeah.
And I'm not ready for that at all.
It's unfortunate. Yeah, I think this most recent election, I think it went pretty well, all things considered.
Yeah, I think he did. Trudeau definitely did not deserve a majority. I don't think he did enough to be voted back and get the vote of confidence of everybody. But the only viable alternative that was polling high enough was the Conservatives.
Yeah.
And it was totally right for the taking. And the fact that the Conservatives lost, I think, is an indictment of Scheer and his inability to take advantage of a real opportunity to win.
Yeah, for sure. So I think as far as things went, the NDP is going to be able to have a pretty significant say in how things go, right? Because if you look at Liberal and NDP are obviously going to be the two closest aligned parties here in all likelihood, and I think that's good. Yeah,
it's almost a little bit sad in some ways, right? Because let's say the Trans Canada Pipeline, the Conservatives will probably be willing to go with the Liberals on that.
Yeah.
So that means that kind of stuff is going to pass.
Yeah.
But it also means that we're probably going to get a little bit more cooperation and less of that kind of polarizing politics that's happening in the U.S. right now, where
one can only hope.
Yeah. Well, listen, when one party's in power, they can sort of do what they want, and it's I've always been a big fan of the underdog. I always like it when the people rise up, or the person who was not given a big chance to win does, and those kind of make good stories.
Oh, I wish I could remember the thing in full, but I'm reading my social psych textbook, the difference between people left and right politically, generally, especially with social left. The people on the left tend to view fairness very highly as one of the main sort of central moral tenets. There was something like 5, and they looked at the breakdown of what each one was considered politically. Right. And so you're talking about there is your sort of appeal to fairness, right? Giving people who have previously not been given opportunities success.
Right.
Yeah. So there we go. We can maybe move on to our next and final question. This one comes from Hank Lenham, and he says, "Really enjoy watching these and popping in from time to time to see how you all are doing. Not related to this video, I think it's fine for you all to use YouTube as a platform to share ideas and only use it when you're feeling inspired. I don't think any of your subscribers like me want you both to feel pressure to keep pumping out new content when you don't feel like it. Even if the content slows or changes, I like you both for your personalities and your thoughtful comments on things including video games, but anything else as well. No matter what you all choose to do, whether it be finding a new game to produce content on, or only posting Injustice videos every once in a while, or something entirely different, I'll keep watching." So first off, thank you so much.
Yeah,
that's
big thank
really
you.
Nice. That's a great thing to say. This is pretty much the ideal thing to hear from somebody who likes watching our content.
Right.
Right? Even somebody who, only pops in from time to time. Because honestly, that's totally reasonable. People have things to do, right? You've got a lot of really great entertainment to choose from, even when you are only counting people similar to us. Even if you're only looking at sort of like equivalent forms of media, you've still got a massive amount to choose from.
Oh yeah. I mean, so to me, this is kind of the nature of the beast, both from the perspective of YouTube and the perspective of us putting stuff out.
I mean, the good news is we still enjoy this stuff.
Yeah,
as
for sure.
long as it remains sort of as easy as it is right now, I have no plans in stopping. And I think the thing about transitioning to other stuff is that, like we've said before, we'll probably do it. But this content is, in a lot of ways, the only sort of thing we could do on the schedule.
Right. Right. And I appreciate the fact that Hank was saying that it doesn't matter if we stick to schedule, but that's the other nature of the beast. A regular upload is what YouTube favors, and regular upload is actually what keeps us going. Because if we stopped, if there wasn't...
if we had no reason to, film before a particular day, it just wouldn't happen.
Right. There's been a few times, actually, where because it felt like we should do something, we ended up doing something, and we were really happy with it.
Yeah.
And it's part of the reason why we've got maybe a couple more team ideas, at least before the current inspiration runs out, that I think are kind of fun, that would be worthwhile doing.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, here's the thing, right? YouTube has changed since we started a little bit, at least for the ad review. I still remember when we first started, and I was so excited when our first day we had like 10 cents worth of ad revenue.
Yeah.
And I thought, man, that is so good.
That's
it might
crazy.
It's a huge amount of money for what we're doing, and it'll only take us a few years to pay out.
Yeah. So for sure, this is still enjoyable content as long as it's feasible content. We mentioned it before. We're planning on doing stuff pretty much no matter what, just eventually, and it's exactly for people like you, right? Where even if we stop making content, the idea that when we are looking at it from sort of like a numbers game, right? Especially when you try to view it in terms of like ad revenue or like month-over-month performance or like total views, right?
Yeah.
It's really easy to sort of get bogged down with it. But I think to some extent, if we end up not being able to make this content anymore and then we have to leave and come back, there's going to be a sort of fresh appreciation for what like 200 people clicking on a video and watching it means. Right? Because when we just look at the numbers and we're comparing it to how we used to do, right? Videos aren't doing as well. But I think the worse videos do, the easier it is to think about it in terms of, wow, that's still like, most of 1,000 people who are, subscribed or looking at our channel, right? Within a couple days of the video coming out, clicking on it and, seeing what we have to say. And that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jinx. So I'm trying to figure out a way to put this. I mean, what this channel has given us an excuse to do, I mean, clearly our lives have branched out a little bit, right? Like they've diverged a bit more in the last couple of years. What it's given us is an excuse to structure some time, to spend together, to have a conversation, and I'll value that no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
But if there isn't an audience watching, what it changes is the idea of whether it's necessary, even worth it, to film it. And where it would suffer is that we would probably end up spending less time talking. But, I mean, there's so many different reasons why it's still worth doing, right? Like, one, it should be a small one, is that we've got the Patreons, where we feel like we've got an obligation and a responsibility to them. Two, it's because it feels like the channel, even if it's not generating a lot of ad revenue, the fact that it does feels like it means it's something that's worth saving, which means that putting out regular content.
Mm-hmm.
And I still enjoy the game.
Mm-hmm. Which is impressive in its own right.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there's still there's just so many characters, and because of how the game is developed, there's still layers of things that probably bear exploring. That the fact that we found a new use for Red Lantern Hal Jordan again after years of hating on him for being the DC's Justin Trudeau.
Yeah. Oh my god.
I think. I mean, clearly they've created a very beautiful game, and it's worth celebrating.
Yeah.
I think, I don't even know where I'm going with this. It's that there's something to be said about how YouTube has pushed us to continue. If there wasn't that kind of impetus, if we hadn't felt an obligation, I think we would have missed out on producing a lot of things, because it's easy to get into that inertia of not putting out a video
Yeah.
and then letting sort of the rest of your life spread out a little bit. It's like when you've got more room, you end up with more junk. You just have more junk to fill it.
Yeah.
That the rest of our life would have filled up the spaces that we sort of hold aside.
Yeah. Okay, so here's a good example. I've been talking, whenever we talk about what we might do next, I think about the ideas for potential video essays to dip my toe in that I would imagine are not going to be very good, but maybe worth sort of refining my at least sort of argumentative skills or presentation skills, right? As a baseline. I spent most of today not being particularly productive, and, you know, it didn't occur to me to work on those things because it's not a natural thought, right? In the same way that would never happen for these videos because, you know, we know when they come out, right? We do them on Tuesdays. And I know a lot of artists do things like every days or...
every days?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, where they release a piece of content every day.
Wow.
So I recently, on the Corridor Crew channel, they brought on a creator called Beeple, who for the last 12 and a half years has been doing digital art every day. And I showed you his Instagram, actually. That was you know, had a lot of weird stuff. I don't know how I feel about it holistically. It's at Beeple_crap, I think, on Instagram.
So, all right, so what was interesting to me when I was looking at that Instagram was that when artists, even the really great artists, they'll do studies of things, and they'll do a lot of things that are very similar before moving on to the next.
Yeah.
What was striking about what he was doing was that it was all very different.
Okay, obviously, I didn't show you the really weird stuff where there's a lot of, like, babies with, like, political figures' heads photoshopped onto them, and, like, some weird, like, not Photoshop, but, like, they're all, like, 3D rendered, but there's some weird sort of, like, psychosexual, like, political content, and that stuff does have a lot of variations on the same theme. So that, I think
maybe I should be less impressed.
Yeah, some of his images obviously are very different from each other, and I think some of his images are exactly what you just said, and they're a study of I don't know what exactly, but bizarre.
Okay, all right. So maybe I know we could probably talk about this a little bit longer, but what I wanted to ask you a little bit about what happened this week is that you went to a restaurant.
Yeah.
All right, so tell me about it. This a specially themed restaurant.
So this is Au Noir in Toronto, and the entire point, it's you dine in pitch black, so you can't see anything. You have a server who is blind. You order before in like a little lounge area so that you can actually see the menu and everything. And then once you're in there, from the moment you step in to the moment you leave, you can see absolutely nothing. So you need to be led to your table by putting your hand on your waiter's shoulder, and he'll like pull out the chair for you and say like, okay, now sit down, pull it in as far as you can, right? And it's, when they say pitch black, they mean like truly, truly pitch black, like in a way that you will not have experienced not like a once your eyes get adjusted you can see, as in there is no light in this room, there's nothing, there's no visual data, there's nothing to adjust for your eyes to adjust to, because there's no light whatsoever coming in.
So if I'm guessing right, then they're not all seating everybody at the same time. So there's a foyer, like a dark foyer, like where there's a door that opens, and then that one gets the light in, and then there's another door before you get into the room.
Yeah, there's two sets of doors. So you walk in the first one, and then there's still no light in that area, but you basically just get led into through two doors, and like, you know, as he's leading you and he goes, there's a door on your like left, hold it open with your left hand, sort of thing. And which hand you put on his shoulder depends on which side the door is going to be, so that you can hold it open so you're not getting like locked out. It was a weird and trippy experience. It makes eating a challenge in a way, because you don't know where anything is. If you put your cutlery down and carelessly, you'll lose it.
Oh, because
right?
you don't
If you're using cutlery to eat, you sort of just have to stab around on your plate and use your cutlery and try to get that feedback of like getting resistance to see if you've bumped into some food.
Okay. I don't know why it just occurred to me now. What you were saying reminded me of a short story I read from, I think, back in the early 80s or the 70s, called Persistence of Vision by John Varley. And it was a sighted person in a blind community of people who were blind.
Yeah.
And one time, this is I don't remember much else about the story, but this one moment stuck with me where he carelessly, when you mentioned cutlery, he carelessly left a bucket down in a travel area, like a high travel area, and because this whole community was built on trust, that when somebody walked into it, they had no idea it was there, and they totally wiped out, and it was like such a betrayal of the trust of the community to do something like that. That was a significant failure.
Yeah.
I would hate to... All right, so when you walked out, did you look down at your clothes and notice a bunch of food that had gotten on yourself that
I
you hadn't
hadn't
realized?
spilled that much food, actually.
That much or at all?
That much. I think there's probably a very small amount. But, yeah, I mean, you just... Because it fundamentally changes the eating experience, because I'm eating super carefully, right? So you're eating with that in mind, like knowing that you're gonna get tons of stuff on your clothes if you eat carelessly at all. Like every time you have to reach for your drink, right? You have to make sure you know exactly where it is, and you reach out super, super slowly. And you can't do the same sort of like feeling around for it, because you're gonna, run the risk of knocking it over. So you sort of just have to open your hand wide. Like really wide, really just slide it forward, and then when it's in your hand, you sort of grasp it.
All right, so you're shaping your hand like you're like a glass of water or something like that, because I would be afraid of knocking over a glass of water, or when I pick it up, it would be not level and I would spill it.
The other fun thing was when you were eating, you had to figure out what parts of the food were on your plate. So for my main course, I had green beans, mashed potatoes, and some meat. They let you order mystery dishes, so I had to figure out what I was eating as I was eating too. I just knew that it was protein. I think it was beef. I think it was steak, but I'm not 100% sure. And I never will be. But when you're eating, you have to figure out where the food is, and when I started, all I could get was mashed potatoes, because it was just located centrally, or wherever I dug in first. And so I would just go in for I would just dive in with my fork, and I would just come up with mashed potatoes every time. And I ate all the mashed potatoes before I found anything else. I had like a couple of green beans, but all I could get was mashed potatoes, and then all of a sudden they were all gone. And I was looking for the mashed potatoes later, and I couldn't find it. Like it was a really sort of interesting experience, because then you have eaten everything on one of the areas of your plate, and you have to figure out where the other food is, or if there's more food. So when I was finishing up, I wasn't sure if I was done yet or not. I couldn't tell if there was more food hiding somewhere on my plate, and I didn't want to dive in and like dive my fingers into my plate and swipe my hands through all like the sauce and whatever. But it was definitely a lot of fun, and it was definitely worth trying. I think they also have one in Montreal, like specifically Au Noir. I think there's it's one of those things where there's like 2 or 3 locations. It's not like a chain. But if you're in the Toronto area, not cheap, but worth trying once if you have the money and that sounds fun. Right. And I'm sure there are equivalents, not the same brand other places in the world. And it was definitely interesting. And I think it gives you a certain sort of awareness in a really surface sense.
Like superficial but visceral kind of way.
In a superficial sense of, not having vision, right? And obviously it's totally different, right? Because
you can change it. It's just as simple as walking through a door.
Yeah, and the experience of also... It mimics the experience of painlessly losing your vision all at once, right? At a very specific time, and that is not how disability works for almost anybody, right? If you lose things all at once, it's normally not quite as simple or easy, right? And if you lose things slowly,
it's not as well supported either.
Yeah, and if you lose things more slowly, there's more of an adjustment period, so it's less jarring, right? But it was really interesting, and it was a lot of fun.
That sounds cool.
There we go. Right. Looks like we've run out of footage. So right here at the end, we'd like to give a huge thank you to all the people supporting us on Patreon.
So big thank you to Console Peasant supporting us at the highest tier, Last Word. Shawn, Farrell, Daniel Simonson, Aaron Mall, and Michael DeVries, who are supporting us on the credited level, and Eddie G and Chris Wolf at the gratitude level.
So thanks so much for your support, and thanks so much to all of you for watching. We'll see you next time. Komoda!